So, Dr. Chinwe, I'm going to hand this over to you, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Sue. Welcome, leaders. I'm so excited to see you. I love that this ended up being on a Thursday. That's nothing but God, because I think originally we had it scheduled. Sue, was it Tuesday?
We changed several times. I'm not sure.
But Thursday was the sweet spot, and the Lord made it happen. So I'm
Mhm.
so excited to be with you. I'm going to go ahead and ask that question that we've been asking for 5 years. Can you see me? Can you hear me? And in 30 seconds, give me a thumbs up if you're able to see my slides. That's kind of what we're here for. You just don't want to stare at my face. So you might want to stare at Sue's face, but you don't want to stare at my face. All right. So how are we doing? In the South, we say, are we cooking with grease? We're cooking with grease, y'all. We're good. All right. Awesome. So, welcome to today's webinar that I've titled Supporting the Mental Health of Kids and Teens. This is going to be a practical guide for you for ministry leaders specifically, because you may or may not be trained therapists. My assumption is probably most of you are not, but you are on the front line. So, we'll kind of talk a little bit about what that means and what challenges there are, but also what opportunities there are. So, Sue has already done an excellent job of presenting my bio. I just want to kind of highlight for those of you who aren't familiar with me at all. I just want to sort of highlight a few things that are kind of cool, that I think are kind of cool. So I do own a private practice. I'm actually in my private practice right now in Roswell. My family and I live in Cumming, which is in the North Georgia area. And I have a couple of different degrees, and I was a former school counselor. That's probably what's most interesting to you. So I have loved working with youth and families, and have had the privilege of working with youth and families for the entirety of my career for over 18 years. I went on to teach college. I wanted to teach students who wanted to be counselors because there was so much that I felt like I needed in terms of skills, and I wanted to share that with others. And so I've been doing that for over 10 years, primarily teaching human growth and development and trauma recovery. That's probably my jam. Young people, parents, anxiety, and trauma recovery. Sue mentioned I've got a couple of books. I'll share a little bit about that at the very end. But God has really opened up some amazing opportunities through organizations that Sue and I have worked with. We've collaborated together uh, in these organizations, and also it's just been really nice to be able to talk to corporate folks about mental health, talk to churches about mental health. I've always talked to schools because they're seeing what's happening with mental health, but definitely churches and ministries. You all again are on the front lines, and so it's been just really an honor of mine. So every time I do an intro slide, I always swap out pictures of some big adventure or some beautiful butterfly or some photography, something that excites me about what God has done in my life and through me in the last few months. So a few months ago, I was invited to train in Hong Kong, China, and that was something that was not in my on my bingo card, never in my wildest imagination. So when I think about Ephesians, right, God can do exceedingly above what you can imagine or think, right? I never thought about this. And I said yes. And I was able to bring my family, which was kind of amazing. And my friend Will Hutcherson, who is also a youth pastor, joined me. And what you see in that corner is me speaking to 300 middle and high school Hong Kongers. Because mental health, let me tell you, right? Um, this experience was so profound for me. We were there for 10 days. What it reminded me of was just how universal the struggles around mental health truly are. And kids there carry unique pressures, intense academic pressures, but social pressures, parental pressures. And I just remember thinking when they would come up and share some things, I just kept saying, Lord, these cries are familiar, right? To what I'm hearing when I travel across the country, and probably what you are seeing and experiencing in your ministry. So Just wanted to share a little bit about that. So let's sort of, lay a little bit of a foundation down as we are talking about supporting kids and teens who are hurting, right? So the next few slides are really going to be more about what I'm seeing, what the research is showing, what concerns me, but also what opportunities I think lies before us as leaders. So, yes, we are seeing high rates of anxiety and depression among young people, especially teenagers, particularly among girls. Our boys are having some unique challenges as well. And I want to tell you that it is across the globe, but we are seeing some rates that are higher here in the US versus other countries. We're seeing I would say, sharply escalating rates of concerning behaviors at school. I'll be here all day if I listed all of what we were seeing. We're also seeing higher rates of chronic school avoidance or school absenteeism. So the national average in the US is 23%. And when you trace back to why are these kids missing school? The root is mental health. So the trends were in motion well before the pandemic. And so we know that. We know that COVID didn't help, but I've got to tell you that I saw these things in the research 10 years prior to COVID. But what COVID did, for those of you who are working with younger kids, is really highlight how young people needed the social connection. They lost 2 to 3 years on average of academic and social learning. Not that a teacher is standing there and teaching them how to be social, but just the opportunity to engage with freedom, right? That was missing. And so, what I also want to highlight is that students weren't the only ones to struggle. Part of my research and part of my conversations with adults across the country highlighted that there were so many demands placed on educators, on youth leaders, on parents because of what we have just gone through in the last 5 to 6 years. And some of it was pretty intense. I've spoken to a lot of teachers who just went into early retirement during COVID, but also in the immediate years following COVID. Principals who all of a sudden, this is one story that's really true. This is actually my client, amazing principal of an elementary school. She went into early retirement and now she wants to be a flight attendant. I'm not mad at her. By the way, that sounds like a fun job, but she was so great at her job, and I just can only imagine just how much she's going to be missed. And she said it's just the kids are not the same, and the parents are stressed, and the kids are stressed. So a lot of positions are still yet to be filled 5 years later. That's what I'm seeing in the data. And of course, especially at schools where our most vulnerable, marginalized populations are, uh, those schools are massively short-staffed. So just a little bit of the landscape. But I want to share with you in the next 40 minutes or so, I'm hopeful that you'll leave with not only a clearer picture of what's happening from the standpoint of kids and students' mental health, but how to support, how to recognize that a child might be struggling and exactly what to say and not what, and things maybe that we should avoid saying, that people really lean into that. Like what should I not say? How can I not step on a minefield, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I really want to focus on leader sustainability. That's a huge passion of mine is counselor wellness, youth minister wellness, and educator wellness as well, because we can't fully regulate a child or take care of a child if we're not taking care of ourselves. So back to the numbers and the landscape. 1 in 5 teenagers are reporting persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. 42% of high schoolers say that they've experienced some form of I guess this is pretty much similar, right? Persistent sadness or hopelessness. I thought I'd switch this out to another stat, a self-harming stat, but we're really going to land with anxiety, which has quickly become the number one diagnosed mental health condition among children and teenagers in the US, and it's actually the number one health condition across the globe, mental health condition. So, according to data from the US Department of Health and Human Services, anxiety impacts young people at a higher rate than depression or any other behavioral health disorder. So, when I was a school counselor, probably now 16 years ago, um, depression was the number one mental health diagnosis. But now we're seeing that there's a 61% increase in anxiety as a diagnosis, not just occasional worry, I'm stressed sometimes, but anxiety between the years 2016 and 2023, a 61% increase. So I went to this church in Arizona, a beautiful, beautiful church. I believe the name was Cornerstone, but don't my memory is not the best in this season. There's a lot going on in this season. Beautiful, beautiful church. They had never talked about mental health. They'd never done a program for parents around mental health. And they invited Will and I to come, and they were so excited about just the movement, right? Like once they started to open the conversations up, the kids were like, "Thank you." It's like a door opened and a bunch of kids ran through and they were like, "I'm dealing with this. I'm dealing with that. Thank you for talking about this. Where can we find support? Please help my parents. Please, and so it was a big deal. So they did so many different initiatives. And of course, this was a bigger church. It's not a multi-site church, but a bigger church. So they had resources. So they had this huge wall when you first walk into the church, and they asked kiddos to put a dot next to or select a colored dot that represented something that they were struggling with. And they only had three options: anxiety, depression, addictive behavior. I'm sorry, four: suicidal thoughts. Take a look at the dots. And by the way, I'm hiding about two-fourths of the board. You can probably tell that anxiety was the number one thing that kiddos and teenagers were struggling with. So we're going to focus our talk today on not everything. I sometimes talk about self-harm. I actually had a couple of slides about self-harm, but maybe next time, we'll dive into that. But right now, I really want to focus on anxiety. So that uncomfortable feeling of dread, right? That something bad is going to happen, that I am bracing myself for some sort of threat. Both psychology and scripture name this as fear/anxiety. So, for those of you who are not familiar with anxiety as a clinical diagnosis, mental health professionals, we can actually diagnose anxiety at a really young age. That makes me sad to say, but we are seeing kids who have debilitating worries that will reach the level of a clinical diagnosis at the age of 4. So, between 4 and 8. 2 to 8% of 3 to 11-year-olds and about 32% of teenagers in the US have an anxiety disorder. So, anxiety is something that's pre-wired into all of us as humans because it's essentially the way that we respond to danger, to a threat in our environment. But here's the thing, that threat can be perceived or it can be um, actual, right? But sometimes as kids and even as adults, we can't tell the difference, right? But I do want families to know that healthy doses of anxiety are necessary. So we're also in a place where we can kind of overreact if our kids are having, some worries or stress. Stress is a part of life, I always say. Anxiety helps us to learn what could go wrong so that we can make the necessary preparations, right? There's a level of anxiety for us to get up out of bed and go to work that's needed. There's a level of anxiety today. I'm in the midst of, seeing clients and I'm like, okay, what time is it? I don't want to miss this webinar with you all. Am I fully prepared? Anxiety can propel us to do things that are important and that matter to us, right? But it can also be excessive and pervasive, and it could also be really not fun. So I want to share with you that a visual that I show kids and teenagers when I'm doing talks for kids and teenagers is this, and that probably gets the biggest reaction over anything else I say or do. And I was surprised by that, right? I was like, oh, these big kids aren't going to care. I think I was talking to like 800 campers, high schoolers, and they had a big reaction as soon as this image came up. Now, that was amusing and also a little sad, right? But I love anything that can help kids sort of wrap their minds around, these huge phenomenons and these things that are happening in their world and anything that can be helpful, right? And I got to tell you, I took all three of my kids to see Inside Out 2. 10, 14, and then my 21-year-old, and everybody had something to take away. And one of my kids has autism. Every child was like glued to the screen. So if you're not familiar, in Pixar's Inside Out 2, anxiety is introduced as a new character and also the central, I would say, antagonist, right? Making her debut following Riley, who's the main character's 13th birthday. So, any of you leading 13-year-olds, parenting 13-year-olds, know of any 13-year-olds, this film consulted with mental health therapists because that's when hormones are converging with social stuff. And 13 is also the sudden onset of puberty, so it's a tough age. So anxiety arrived at headquarters, heavily packed with literal luggage, right? I'm here, symbolizing, I think, the emotional baggage that really does come with the teenage years. And so what we know about anxiety is that it has many different faces. Right. So anxiety was supposed to protect Riley from the visible and the invisible dangers in her environment. But anxiety did too good of a job of planning for, let's say, worst case scenarios, right? Here's me packing for a 2-day trip, right? That's the face of anxiety. Here's me trying to get things done, but I am so exhausted because my mind was racing all night long. Good morning, beauties. It's Monday. Never mind. Take that back, right? We call it the Sunday scaries when I'm doing workshops for corporate folks, but we all can relate to this. On Sunday, we start to feel anxious about all the things that come with Monday. For you all, it's probably Saturday, right? All the things that will unfold on Sunday. Anxiety can make us drink a lot of coffee because we're going to get things done because it's in our head and we want to get it out of our head and we're going to check off the to-do list and just, go through our plans, and then, it just can be a lot. And that's that was the reaction to all the different parts of Riley when anxiety showed up. Whoa, this is a new character, right? So what I want you to know is that although the term or the name anxiety is the same, whether you see it in adults or young people, but it can present very differently. Oftentimes with younger people, anxiety can present as anger and irritability, right? And also it can present as someone who is just getting the job done. Like they are very efficient. They are maybe even considered a high flyer, a high achiever, a perfectionist. I will tell you that I have many clients who at school, the teachers are like, I need 10 of these kids. They are amazing. I need 10 Sallys. I need 10 Sues. I need 10 atoms, right? And then they come into my office and they tell me how they melt down as soon as they get home. They feel paralyzed. They don't know what to do next. They are exhausted. Um, so it's just kind of good to know the different phases of anxiety. So a little bit back to the landscape, what's at the root of anxiety is a lot, but just if we had to put it in two buckets, I would say school pressures and social pressures. That's the number one reason kids cite for their stress and worry and anxiety. It is amplified, as you all probably know, by online social comparison. The numbers are really highlighting that mental health issues that are facing young people across the nation has really been contributed by, or what's contributing to the increase rather, is just our fast pace, high expectation, digitally connected culture that we're living in. And believe it or not, young believers have more of a conflict because they then have that I would say a double dose of guilt and shame because they believe as believers that they shouldn't be anxious, right? And so here's where I remind young people and adults alike that yes, Paul says, do not be anxious, but we are given a lot of tools, right? Because the Lord knew that we would be anxious, right? So we don't, that's probably the number one intervention is to just really normalize the anxiety and the worry and the stress that young people feel and remind them that that does not mean that they lack faith or they're not being a good Christian if they feel those things. I had a kid said, didn't Paul said not to feel anxious. God doesn't want us to feel anxious. So we want to just remind them that there are tools to deal with the anxiety that the Lord knew that we would inevitably feel. And so, yes, there's a lot here. I also want to share, I think it's really important to share that there are kids that are not okay. There are kids that are struggling. More kids are doing well. More kids are navigating. They're experiencing the stress and they are doing well. But the focus today is on how we can support those who are struggling. But remember, all of the tools that I am sharing today can be used with your group, the folks that you support, whether or not they're struggling with a mental health diagnosis and what the research shows is even though we sometimes feel powerless when we think about, I mentioned it, so I'll say it again, self-harm, depression, debilitating anxiety, the fact that the numbers are rising, that can make us feel powerless, but that's not what the research shows. So what the research shows consistently is that even one caring adult is enough to build mental and emotional resilience. So you being here is a big deal because you matter, and maybe now more than ever. So I just want to share just a few things that you already know. So I'm going to go through this really quickly. There are advantages and there are also gaps to your role, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. But just to highlight the advantages, there are fewer barriers to access, right? If you're working directly with kiddos or families, folks trust you. Right? They don't need to schedule an appointment like they do with me. They don't need to go through Psychology Today to kind of figure out, okay, who's going to be a good fit, right? You've got that relational continuity. And for some of you who've been in the same role or the same church for a while, you may know a student or a family for a decade. And that's really important that you know not just the child, but the family, right? Sometimes I've talked to ministry leaders. There's a friend of mine in Iowa. They've known generations of the family, right? The gap is just what's always been a gap in ministry. There's always not enough money, right? The budget is not big enough for this, for the need, especially around mental health. There's not a lot of clinical training around mental health, even though we know that you're on the front lines. That's really important. And you already said it at the very beginning. I was listening to your conversation. You're wearing so many different hats, especially if you're in a smaller church, right? You are covering so many different roles. There's less of a capacity to focus in one area. Larger churches, sometimes that's not as much of an issue, but certainly if you're at a smaller church. And then something that I think can be changed starting tomorrow or next week is just finding those referral sources. We know that the need is great. More and more people are going into the field of counseling. So yes, there's still not enough in rural areas, but just finding the people who love working with youth and connecting with them is it's a really good first step. So before we dive into anything else, I want to name something that's really important for all of us who work with kids and students, in moments when a young person is struggling with their mental or emotional health, I want you to remember that your role is what we call a first responder, right? And your job is simple but powerful. Your job is to notice, to stabilize to the best of your ability, and to connect. That's it, to connect that child to appropriate care. Please know that you are not expected to diagnose. If I teach a skill and you're like, this doesn't make sense to me, please do not implement it. But if you practice it on yourself and maybe your kiddos at home or your family and it feels good, you can try it, but you are not expected to treat or to have all the answers. And knowing your specific lane is actually quite protective. It is helpful for both you and the child or the student because you just want to make sure that they're getting the right level of care, the right support at the right time. And so, speaking of that, in mental health and also in medical health or physical health, there's a term called triage, right? So, that's the initial. Give me a thumbs up if you've ever heard of or watched Grey's Anatomy. Nod to Grey's Anatomy. Okay. So, triage is, Grace, you said yes. I think I saw you. Or your pencil. I don't know if that was your thumb or your pencil. Okay, there you go. It was your thumb. So one of my favorite shows, I just love hospital shows. I love doctor shows. I'm gonna be like dating myself. Like, what's that show? Doogie Howser. Do you guys remember Doogie Howser? Oh my gosh. Love that show. And then there was another one that had an autistic doctor as like the main physician. But anyways, triage is really the initial screening process that's used to evaluate a person's psychological state, determine the urgency of their needs, and then the next step. Right. And so we assign them to the next step. I worked at a hospital not far from where I am right now, a psychiatric hospital for a number of years, and I worked in the crisis stabilization triage unit. And our job was to see people. I would meet with them for maybe an hour, if I could, sometimes depending on just the state. I had 20 or 30 minutes to determine what comes next. Do I send them home? Do I send them to, do I admit them in the hospital? Do I send them with a list of referrals so they can see a therapist tomorrow? I call the therapist, do you have an appointment? I need you to have an appointment. Like I'm making those determinations on the spot. This process ensures that anybody in acute crisis is receiving immediate, and in some cases, when we're talking about the hospital, especially where I worked, life-saving intervention. So for you, what I just want you to keep in mind is just to have, if you haven't already developed one, you and your team can simply develop some sort of simple triage checkpoint where if a child says, hey, I don't feel like myself, like, what do you do? Right. But do you want to hurt yourself? No, I just don't feel like myself. I'm having friend problems. I'm having some school issues. Okay. We're going to monitor, we're going to check in, we're going to loop the parent in, right? And then if a child says, maybe the child has missed a lot of small group, or you're noticing some differences in their behavior or their presentation, I'm going to break that down to you in a minute. I just want to kind of give you the overview. What do you do then? Well, you probably want to let the parents know, right, that you're noticing some things. And then maybe you want to offer them a referral to a counselor. And then there are moments when you just need to act immediately, right? There's a safety risk. The child is in urgent need of care because they just don't know if they can take care of themselves or they can't promise that they can take care of themselves. And so we'll break that down in just a minute. So, in terms of signs to look out for, this is really the first after normalizing. Hey, we all go through things. Not having or having anxiety doesn't mean you don't love God, doesn't mean you don't trust Jesus, right? After that, we want to be able to recognize when a child is struggling. So, what I want to name is that kids rarely say, I'm struggling. They rarely say, I'm anxious, even in the therapy room, right? I have questions and I have ways to sort of assess for that. That's my job. But oftentimes, kiddos are going to express their worries through physical complaints. And I say kiddos, but teenagers as well. They're going to express their worries through repeated questions. They're going to express their worries through requests for reassurance over and over again, or statements that mask how scared they are, or how frustrated they are, or their need for control, because that's really what's underneath anxiety. So, recognizing these direct and also indirect ways that kiddos and teens may express their distress helps families, and it helps you as a leader to spot hidden stress early. So this is the bulk of what I do when I'm traveling across the nation, is really helping parents and leaders and teachers recognize signs of distress. So if you have a child that drops in terms of their engagement or participation, if they're not hanging out with friends like they used to, this is what I tell parents. Starting at around 11 and 12 years old, when kids are entering adolescence, they're going to prioritize their friendships over you. Don't take it personally. But if they stop hanging out with their friends, that's a red flag, because kids love to hang out with their friends, teenagers especially. So if there's a sudden change in friend group, that's not necessarily a red flag. For me, that's a yellow flag, working in schools as long as I did. When there's a big reaction to something that maybe, even they on a different day would consider just a small annoyance, we want to pay attention. Physical restlessness, constant foot tapping, that's something that you would be able to observe because it's happening outwardly. Nail biting, skin picking, pacing, those are physical signs of distress. And we just want to ask more questions. And then, what if is the big phrase that's the beginning of the phrase that signals anxiety. What if something bad happens? What if my parent doesn't come? What if I don't remember what's on the test? What if I fail, right? And a big part of school anxiety for a lot of kids who are academically inclined or high achievers is, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I don't always know how to do it, right? And then if I figure out how to do it, what's the outcome? Is the outcome always going to be favorable? Right? What if it's not favorable? What if I'm not meeting the teacher's expectations? So you can kind of follow their thought processes if you're sitting down with them and having a conversation. Some kids are like, I have so much to do, right? I can't think, or it doesn't matter. I'm going to fail anyway, sort of like giving up. Statements about being a burden, or even joking about not being here anymore. Those are things that we do not want to take lightly, and we don't want to take as a joke until we can confirm that they're actually joking. So, some of you are working with kids and teenagers, or maybe throughout your career, you've had the opportunity to work with younger kids and older kids. So, these are just some general signs that could look a little different depending on the phase. So younger kids, when we see a regression, a child who was potty trained and they're wetting the bed or soiling themselves, that's something that we want to pay attention to. Oftentimes kids will say, my tummy hurts. They'll go to the nurse a lot. They'll have a big reaction to smaller changes. That could be a sign of emotional distress. So we don't want to label, we don't want to place a diagnostic label. We just want to say, something's off, something is there that we want to pay attention to. Middle schoolers, don't we love middle schoolers? I have an 11-year-old and a 15-year-old right now. So sharp shift in friend groups, increased secrecy and sensitivity to social comparisons. Some of that we're going to see during adolescence, but if it's pervasive and if it's getting in the way of them doing life, if there's like a preoccupation, that's something that we want to pay attention to. And then as kids get older, we will see kids start to withdraw more. Even in the teenage years, there's more of a need for privacy. So you'll see kids closing doors. That's not uncommon. That's not odd. But if it's, again, them avoiding and withdrawing from friends, if they're using substances to numb out, if they're engaged in risk-taking behavior, and of course, if they are using direct language around despair or hopelessness, that's when we really want to lean in. I talk a lot about the nervous system. I guess it's gotten a little bit trendy and popular on social media if you're on social media. Even ministry leaders, I was watching Nona Jones, who's brilliant. And she's a past, just amazing. But she's also worked on face with Facebook and youth. I think it's YouVersion. She's talking about the nervous system. I followed her for a long time. I've not ever heard her use that term, but it's something that kids are talking about, right? They are aware of how anxiety, chronic stress, and trauma affect their nervous system. So I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about the nervous system, right? And it's really just around physical signs. I'm not going to go into the neuroscience, but just physical signs of a child not being okay, right? When their nervous system is in overdrive or their nervous system is hypo-aroused, we may notice a shift in their appearance, their behavior. But I like to use the term dysregulation as opposed to naughty, misbehaving, being bad, because I think it just helps parents and caregivers and even educators to realize that when a child is dysregulated, when their nervous system is in overdrive or hypoaroused, it's not necessarily that they're being difficult. It's not anything to take personally. Um, it's a stress response, right? So when a child is experiencing a stress response, their survival brain is taken over. So Will and I talk about left brain, right brain. The right brain is where big emotions live, and the left brain is where rational thought lives. When a child has big emotions on the right side of the brain, it will absolutely hijack their ability to even receive logic and to think rationally. So when you're noticing outward behavior of screaming, yelling, or shutting down, think of it as a psychological distress signal. So I love talking about the window of tolerance. I have so many different things that I use when I'm in my counseling office to show kids and adults, or to demonstrate or illustrate what's happening, internally. This has become really popular, and I purchased this, I think, from Etsy. I have so many different ones that I've purchased or I've requested permission. I really probably just need to create one on my own, but adults love this. So let me explain what this is. This is the window of tolerance, or this illustration is depicting the window of tolerance, which is a term that was coined by Dr. Dan Siegel. And it's a concept from psychology. Really, we talk a lot about it in trauma work because it helps us understand how our nervous system responds to stress and emotions. So it describes the middle part where we're able to manage stress well enough. Does not mean that the stress won't come, it will, but we'll be able to manage it and we'll stay calm enough, focused enough within that window. We can handle challenges, right? There will be a little bit of dysregulation because stress is annoying. When things don't go our way, we will be frustrated, but we can primarily stay within the window of, okay, let me figure out how to manage it. But this is why this is why can't you just calm down, or please calm down, even if we say it kindly, doesn't work. Because if a child is outside of their window, right? It's neuroscience. They aren't as calm. They aren't as alert. They don't have the ability to problem solve or even sometimes have a conversation with you. I've had kids where even in my office, the mom will say something, the child, has a big reaction, and then mom says a lot of loving things after that. And then I'll say to the child once they're calm, "Did you hear mom say that?" "No, she said that. She didn't say that." She did. Like the child could not hear mom course correct and say, "I love you. I care about you. That I didn't mean it that way," right? So above the window, the child is angry, irritable. We call this hyperarousal, fight or flight. Below the window is kind of like, I don't care, right? Numbness, withdrawing, even insisting that nothing is wrong. So the big idea here is connection first. Connection first. Kids can only listen and reason when they're within their window of tolerance, and there's certain things that can help them to get back within the window. So just really quickly, notice the signs. This is just a good framework for you if you're taking notes. Notice the signs. Name what you are seeing if you're working with a child. Hey, I noticed that you seem exhausted, or last time we were in small group, you were looking out the window. Just those behavioral signs keeps it very like evidence focused, right? It's not your opinion. It's what you saw. It's what you experienced. And then coping tools, we'll talk about that next. And so you could even say something like, hey, can I teach you something that helps me? And then the next part is looping a parent or professional in. So let's talk about some tools that you can have in your toolbox. So this is, Sue will recognize this. We use this a lot. I feel like I see it everywhere now. Somebody bought a clock for me that had this on the face. I went to a ministry, I went to a church. Who's laughing? Is that you, Sue? I went to a church. And is that somebody's laughing? I'm enjoying it. I went to a church and somebody had a pillow. Somebody had a pillow with this on, not somebody, the ministry team purchased the pillows and I took a picture with it and I think I posted it on social media. And they were so proud of these pillows that had like all the feelings, and they were inspired, Sue, by the organization that we were working with at the time, right? Grace, are you loving that? And let me tell you what I love about this. This was developed with the help of teenagers. So if you look carefully, you'll see things like disappointed. Yes, you'll see nauseated, right? You'll see I'm peaceful, but then I'm let down. I'm bitter. I'm loathing. So these are words that teenagers use to describe how they're feeling. And I love this because we want to go beyond the typical three feelings: mad, happy, sad, right? Brene Brown has done extensive research on emotions. I think the name of her book is The Atlas of the Heart, and she discovered that there are 87 different feelings and experiences, but we normally don't even go there. Emotions are not one dimensional. It is natural to struggle with something deeply, but to struggle to put it into words. Dan Siegel says, help children put, and your spouses, put feelings into words, right? Because it takes a little bit of the edge off, right? It doesn't make the problem go away, but it actually helps to reduce the intensity. So that's probably the top simple strategy that I teach ministry leaders. And if you have kiddos that are younger, I don't know if you can see this. I'll show you when it's just me on the screen. I like to use something that's just a little bit more easier for young people to identify. Those are a lot of words and big words. And then I also like to remind students, young people, while anxiety is very real, that's the validation of it. The things that it likes to tell us is not, it can be actually very harsh, right? And so we want to really, hold those thoughts captive and assess or scrutinize whether or not those thoughts are helpful or not. And then in terms of your response, right? Here's some things that you can say to normalize, kind of what you're seeing and to validate your child, even if it's not 100% normal, but just, for me, validation just means accepting that what they are feeling is true for them, even if I wouldn't feel the same way given the same set of circumstances, right? So saying, hey, you seem really tired. Do you want to talk about it? And then we'll talk about asking directly about self-harm. And then at the end, show appreciation, give them positive feedback because they are scared to tell you these things. Maybe they even got the message that they shouldn't say these things to anyone. So say, I'm so glad you said this. Let's figure out our next steps together. You want to avoid saying things that are well-meaning. hey, everybody feels that way sometimes. That sounds nice, but it can come off as minimizing. You want to make sure that you're not promising total secrecy. Youth pastors should never promise total secrecy because of legal, ethical, professional duties to protect minors. Each and every one of you as clergy and youth leaders are legally classified as mandated reporters. So we have to report to the parents and to even authorities like Child Protective Services if that's warranted. And then definitely we want to avoid visibly panicking in the moment. I love, just finding things that kids can relate to. Last year, the Olympics was huge. I think it was last year. I actually put this in my book. Simone Biles, who's 11-time Olympic, medalist, stepped back from gymnastics because of a psychological phenomenon called the twisties. So, without going into the medical part of it, when she would do her jump or tumble or go up in the air, it was like she lost sight of where the ground was. So there was this really dangerous disconnection between the mind and her body during some of these aerial maneuvers. So super, super scary. But here's the thing that I tell young people, she came back. She took care of herself, right? This was a mental block, and it increased the risk of severe injury. And she was scared, and it's okay to be scared, right? But she came back. She did mental health therapy. She relied on her friends. And you teach young people that they can rely on their faith and trust that God will care for them. And so when kids are anxious, it's human nature for any of us really to have this instinct to sidestep or completely avoid any situation that poses a mental or emotional or physical risk. What would it be like to tackle our problems head on, but with support? Anxiety is a liar, so we talk back to anxiety. Oftentimes, like heightened anxiety will be lying to us because it's just doing too much. That's what I say to young people. It's thinks it's helping us, but it's like inside out too, right? It's doing too much, right? So you can talk back to it. This feeling is uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous. I don't have to figure everything out right this second. Thoughts are just thoughts. They are not facts. It's not great. What I'm feeling is not great, but I've survived this. This is not good, but God is. God is, and He's promised to never leave me nor forsake me, and I can cast my cares onto Him. Whatever the case may be, we have to talk back to anxiety. The cycle feels scary, and this is one way that we can at least slow it down. Um, and these are just text messages that you can send to a young person who is anxious. And just a big one is right there on my left. I'm always here if you want to talk about anything that you are feeling or thinking, right? I am thinking of you right now. I had two people, Sue, I don't know, you reached out to me, but I think it was about this. I had two people reach out to me yesterday and say you were on my mind. Right. And I think I just flown back from San Francisco. I probably was a little overwhelmed, but that makes me feel good that I was on someone's heart, right? And Sue woke me up this morning. I woke up this morning to a text where Sue was like, I'm praying for you. Like those things matter. And I'm a grown person, right? So imagine a child who's and then panic attacks are really common. The key here is for you as the support staff, as the helper, is to be as calm as possible. What really helps with panic attacks is something called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method, where you're encouraging a young person to search for 5 things that they can see in their environment, 4 things that they can hear, 3 things that they can touch, 2 things that they can smell, and 1 thing that they can taste. So this is everywhere. You can find that on Google. And then I also tell young people, this is just a post that I put on social media a little while ago. When you're having or you're in the midst of, having a panic attack, leave your environment. Oftentimes, kids are worried about people watching them, and that makes it worse. Pull over if you're driving. A lot of people have panic attacks in the car. Take a breath or say a prayer. right? And then for you as leaders, it's okay to ask directly if a child is struggling. If you ever worry that asking them will put the idea in their head, please don't. It's a common fear, but it's a myth. It doesn't plant the idea, it opens up the door for conversation. Research shows that over and over again. So if a child or student does disclose self-harm or suicidal thoughts, we don't want to immediately start explaining to them why they shouldn't feel this way. Instead, take a couple of deep breaths yourself. Don't leave a student alone. Ask directly, then listen to whatever they say. And then if they say, I don't know if I can keep myself safe, if they say they're struggling, loop the parent in. Anyone who's maybe the designated point person, so other people know that this is what's happening. And 988 is actually available to you. I spoke to the person that developed 988 in Seattle, Michael Reading. And he's like, I'm still so surprised at how many people don't know about 988. It has saved so many lives. And he's actually doing a conference here in the Atlanta area, and I'm going to be a part of it, which I'm so excited about. I've had a lot of clients have good success. And build your local support map even before you need it. Just have a local a short list of therapists who work with kids and teens. Um, have 988 available, have a designated point person that can help you. And so this is just a recap. I think I've already covered that. What I really want to say is you can't pour from an empty cup. Carrying what students share with you, even secondhand, there's something called vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue. It's common for youth-facing leaders, so please set boundaries, reset your own nervous system, and debrief by talking to someone who understands what you go through. And then finally, anxiety makes us feel limited and restricted. But you and I know, all of us here on this call know that we have the freedom, a new kind of freedom, right? We're not limited. The shackles are off, right? Um, through Jesus, through the blood of Jesus, right? So may the God of hope fill each and every one of you with joy and peace as you trust him so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. So the name of Jesus has power. And boy, I tell you, in the work that I do, I am calling on his name quite a bit. So we have a few minutes left. I wanted to share that I've got resources. You can find resources we've pulled them from Amazon. My co-author and I. So my resources can be found on my website, drchinwe.com. And I'm also active on Instagram. So I'll pause there for any comments or questions. But thank you so much for what you do. And thank you for being here on this call today.
Thank you, Dr. Chinwe. That was really, really great. I have a question, and then I think there's a couple of comments I wanted to share too. Can you unshare your screen, Dr. Chinwe?
You just want to see me. So you just want to
So
see me.
I want to see other faces. Thank you. So,
Oh, I can take myself off. I think I pinned myself too.
no,
Can you
you're
see other
good
faces
right
now?
now.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see everybody. I have a question about, and this relates something that another leader shared too, is sometimes talking to parents when they're unaware that there is a problem is challenging, and and it's hard to know what to say and if what we share is going to be well received or if then we're perceived as just overreacting. So any tips on just how we can be cautious and how we can share, like sharing observations might be better, or just
Yeah.
what's the way to best approach it with parents?
You got this. I'll make this short in case anyone else has another question, but you hit
Okay.
right on the head. Two things immediately come to mind. Anchor whatever you share in behavioral observations, right?
Mm,
So it's not, I think, I wouldn't even go by secondhand information. I would
mm,
say I observed or the small group leader observed and then provide a pattern. And you don't need to because that's when parents will start to dissociate because here's
mm,
my view, they know deep down in their heart when their children are struggling, they may actually be in some form of denial or shame has taken over. So you don't
Mhm.
want to keep going, right? You want, like, I give the same advice when I'm talking to teachers at parent-teacher conference. If a child is struggling, you don't have to list the 10 things that they messed up on that week or a month. Give 2 to 3 things. The parents will get the gist and then immediately go into, I want to support. So that's the very practical thought. My
Mhm.
thought that I had that's really more spiritual comes from
Mhm.
the late Dr. Charles Stanley, right? You know your job, you know young people, and my thought is that you've prayed about this. So you just step into obedience. Your role is to inform the parent of what you're observing. And then Dr.
Mhm.
Charles Stanley always says, leave the consequences to God.
Mhm. That's good. So does that answer y'all's question um, about that, about parenting? Did I ask that in the right way? Thank you. I really appreciate anything else before we go. I know we're over time already, but Dr. Chinwe, that was really helpful. I've taken several pages of notes and I want to go back and watch it more. I really appreciate and had some wise things to tell us that I felt like were really helpful for us in our position. So it's great.
Yeah.
Um, Rebecca, will you pray for us and for these leaders and Dr. Chinwe, and then we'll close out.
Absolutely. Lord, I thank you so much for this time. I thank you for the ministry of Dr. Williams and the way that she blessed us today. I pray that you would anoint her in her one-on-one conversations in her office, on platforms, on social media. Lord, may she just be a beacon of hope and love and equipping. And I pray for each of these leaders here with
Mhm.
us and watching the recording that we would be guided by your spirit, that you would remind us of your presence and let us be just a conduit of your love and your hope in the midst of all that these students and children face. Go before us as we lead, and we thank you for the privilege that it is to serve in this space. Thank you for this time together. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
And
Thanks so much.
thank you so much. Thank you, leaders. God bless you. Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
Take care.
Bye.